In the days when the shadow of Mordor had long passed from Middle-earth, yet whispers of ancient evils still stirred in forgotten places, there came to the village of Bree a stranger clad in the grey robes of the wise. His name was Caldrith, the lore-keeper, and he bore upon his staff the mark of Elrond's house. Though many years had passed since the Lord of Rivendell had sailed into the west, the autumn mists hung heavy over the Barrow-downs as Caldrith made his way along the east road, his keen eyes searching the rolling hills that lay shrouded in morning fog. For 7 days he had journeyed from the ruins of Fornos, following signs and portents that spoke of a stirring in the ancient burial mounds. The rangers of the north had sent word that strange lights danced above the barrows by night, and that the very air seemed to thicken with malice when the moon was dark. "Master Butterbur," spoke Caldrith as he entered the prancing pony, his voice carrying the weight of many winters, though his face seemed untouched by age. "I would hear tell of what passes in the downs of late. The road speaks of unquiet spirits, and the wind carries voices that should long have found their rest." The innkeeper's face grew pale as milk, and he drew close to whisper. "Aye, strange doings indeed, master. Folks say the Barrow-wights walk abroad again, though not as they once did. These be different, older somehow, as if something deeper stirs beneath the green hills." Young Tom Bracegirdle went missing 3 nights past, and his horse came back wild-eyed and foam-flecked, speaking of blue flames that burned cold as winter's heart. Caldrith nodded gravely, his weathered hands tightening upon his staff. In the depths of his grey eyes a light kindled like the memory of distant stars. "Then the time has come at last," he murmured, more to himself than to the trembling innkeeper. "The sleepers wake, and what was hidden shall be revealed." That very night, as the moon hung pale and wan above the Barrow-downs, Caldrith made his way through the twisted paths that wound between the ancient mounds. He was not alone in his vigil, for 3 others had answered the call that echoed in the hearts of the wise. From the Tower Hills came Gilraen the Far-seer, last of the Dúnedain women to bear the sight of Númenor. From the Blue Mountains arrived Thorek Ironfoot, a dwarf lord whose beard was white as snow but whose axe still sang true. And from the borders of the old forest stepped Leaflock, an ent whose gnarled limbs creaked with the wisdom of ages. They met in the shadow of the Great Barrow, that highest of all the mounds which crowned the downs like a king among lesser hills. The air about them shimmered with an eldritch light, and the very stones seemed to pulse with a rhythm older than memory. "The seals weaken," spoke Gilraen, her voice like the whisper of wind through autumn leaves. "I have seen it in the Palantir of Elostirion, ere it too faded from sight. Something stirs beneath these hills that was bound in the elder days, before even the kings of Cardolan made their tombs here." Thorek's grip upon his axe tightened, and the ancient runes carved into its blade began to glow with a pale fire. "Aye, I feel it too. The very earth groans with the weight of it. In the deep places of the mountains, such things sometimes wake. But this is different. This was not made by darkness alone." Leaflock's great voice rumbled like distant thunder. Whom? The trees remember what the stones have forgotten. In the time before time, when the music was new and the world was young, there was a discord in the song, not of Melkor's making, but older still. The roots whisper of in their deep dreaming. Caldrith raised his staff, and its crystal head blazed forth with silver light that pushed back the creeping shadows. "Then you know why we are gathered. The sleeper wakes, and if we cannot turn him back to his rest, then all of Middle-earth may know again the terror of the Elder Dark." As the 4 companions sat in council within the circle of standing stones that crowned the Great Barrow, Caldrith began to speak of things that were old when the world was young. His voice took on the cadence of ancient song, and the very air seemed to listen to his words. In the days before the sun and moon, when only the light of the 2 trees illuminated the world, there came to Middle-earth beings of such power and malice that even the Valar trembled at their approach. These were not of Melkor's making, though he welcomed them gladly, for they served ends that were older than his rebellion. Chief among them was Thuring-Wethil, the vampire queen, but she was not the greatest of her kind. Gilraen's eyes widened with recognition. "You speak of him who was called the Sleeper Beneath, the one whose name was struck from all records, save those hidden in the deepest vaults of Rivendell." "Aye," Caldris continued, his voice heavy with dread. "Gothfang the Deathless, first of the Shadow Spawn, who walked in darkness before even Ungoliant spun her webs of shadow. When the Elder King led his armies against the Servants of the Dark, it was not enough merely to defeat such a one. He was bound by the combined might of Manwë and Varda themselves, sealed beneath the earth in chains wrought from the light of the Silmaril. Thorek spat upon the ground, a gesture of warding among his people. And now these chains weaken? How can such a thing be? The power that bound him was tied to the presence of the Eldar in Middle-earth, Leaflock rumbled. As they pass into the west, so too does their strength fade from these lands. The very sailing of the ring-bearers has hastened this weakening. "But why here?" Gilraen asked, her gaze turning to the dark mounds that surrounded them. "Why do the Barrows wake to his stirring?" Caldris stood, his staff blazing brighter in the gathering darkness. "Because this was his domain in ages past, before Cardolan, before Arnor, before even the Edain came to these shores, this land was his realm. The kings of old unknowingly built their tombs upon his prison, and their very presence has served to weaken the bindings that hold him fast." As dawn broke gray and cold over the Barrow-downs, the companions began their descent into the great barrow itself. The ancient stones parted at Caldris's touch, revealing a passage that sloped down into primordial darkness. The walls were carved with runes that hurt the eye to look upon, symbols that predated even the Elder Futhark of the Eldar. The deeper they went, the more oppressive became the weight of malice that pressed upon them. The very air seemed thick as honey, and strange whispers echoed from the darkness ahead. Thorek's axe blazed with runic fire, while Leaflock's great limbs creaked ominously as he forced his bulk through passages carved for smaller folk. "Stay close," Caldris warned, his voice tight with strain. "The dead that lie here are not mere barrow wights, animated by malice and hate. These are the ancient dead, those who served Gothfang in the elder days and chose to follow him even into his imprisonment. They came at last to a vast chamber carved from the living rock, its ceiling lost in shadow, despite the light of Caldris's staff. In the center stood a sarcophagus of black stone, and around it lay arranged the bodies of kings and warriors from ages past. But these were not the kings of Cardolan. These were older, clad in armor of unfamiliar design and bearing weapons that seemed to drink in the light. "Behold," whispered Gilraen, her voice filled with awe and terror, "the sleepless guard, the chosen of Gothfang who swore to watch over his slumber until the time of his awakening." Even as she spoke, the ancient dead began to stir. Empty eye sockets blazed with eldritch fire, and the rustle of gravecloth filled the air like the whisper of autumn leaves. One by one, they rose from their eternal rest, weapons raised and spectral voices raised in a chant that predated the foundations of the world. "We have tarried too long," Thorek growled, his axe singing as he swung it in great arcs. "They wake to bar our path." But as the dwarf lord's blade bit deep into spectral flesh, Caldris raised his staff high and spoke a word of power that rang like a bell in the darkness. The ancient dead paused in their advance, their blazing eyes fixed upon the lore-keeper with something that might have been recognition. "You know me," Caldris said, his voice carrying a authority that seemed to shake the very foundations of the barrow. "You know what I am, and why I have come. Stand aside, servants of the shadow, for your master's time is not yet come." The ancient dead drew back at Caldris's words, but their retreat was temporary. Already the black sarcophagus in the chamber's heart had begun to glow with a sickly light, and cracks appeared along its obsidian surface. From within came a sound like the beating of a vast heart, slow and measured and filled with malice. "The binding weakens faster than we thought," Gilraen said, her face pale in the eldritch light. The very presence of the dead hastens his awakening. We must act quickly, or all our efforts will be in vain. Leaflock's great voice rumbled through the chamber. Whom? The roots tell of deep places, caverns that reach down to the very bones of the earth. There lies the true prison, not in this shallow grave, but in the foundations of the world itself. Caldris nodded grimly. Then we must go deeper still. But beware, the further we descend, the stronger becomes his influence. Already I can feel his will pressing against mine, seeking to turn our purpose to his own. They found the passage behind the sarcophagus, a spiral stair carved from living rock that wound down into the darkness. As they descended, the very air grew thick with malice, and strange visions began to dance before their eyes. Gilrayan saw the burning of Numenor played out in lurid detail, while Thorek beheld the drowning of Khazad-dûm beneath rivers of flame. Leaflock witnessed the felling of the great trees, their light dying as shadows spread across the world. But Caldris saw the truth that lay beneath all these visions, the rise of Gothfang in the elder days, when darkness first stirred in the depths of Arda. He had been fair to look upon in those days, appearing as a lord of the mire clad in robes of starlight. But his beauty was a lie, masking a hunger that could never be satisfied, and a malice that sought the corruption of all that was good and fair in the world. Do not look too long upon the vision, Caldris warned his companions. They are sent to weaken our resolve and turn us from our path. Hold fast to what is real, to the bonds of friendship and duty that have brought us here. Down and ever down they went, until at last they came to a chamber so vast that their light could not find its walls. In its center lay a pit that seemed to have no bottom, and over it was stretched a web of silver light that pulsed with each beat of the distant heart. The web of Varda, Gilrayan breathed, woven from the light of Arundil's ship, and strengthened with the tears of Elbereth herself. But see how it frays and weakens. Indeed, many of the silver strands had snapped, and others stretched thin as spider's silk. Through the gaps came whispers in a tongue that predated all the languages of Middle-earth, promises of power and dominion that set the mind reeling. As the companions stood before the weakening web of Varda, the whispers from the pit below grew stronger, more insistent. The very air began to shimmer with phantom shapes, visions of Middle-earth remade according to Gothfang's will, where the light of sun and moon was extinguished and all living things served the hunger of the shadow. You see now the futility of your quest, came a voice that seemed to speak from the depths of eternity itself. I am older than the foundations of this world, mightier than the kings of the valor. What hope have you, children of a younger age, against one who strode the void before the music of creation was sung? Thorek raised his axe defiantly, though his hands trembled at the overwhelming presence that pressed upon them. We've faced dark lords before, Shadowspawn. Sauron himself fell to the courage of mortal folk. Laughter like the grinding of millstones echoed from the pit. Sauron, that upstart apprentice, he was but a pale reflection of my power, a servant who forgot his place. When I am free, I shall teach him the meaning of servitude anew. But Caldris stepped forward, his staff blazing with silver fire that pushed back the encroaching darkness. Your words ring hollow, deathless one. If you were truly as mighty as you claim, these bonds would not hold you. You are trapped by your own nature, bound not just by the valor's might, but by the very laws of Ea itself. The presence in the pit stirred with rage, and several more strands of the web snapped under the force of its fury. Clever words, Lore Keeper, but cleverness will not save you when the last strand breaks. Already my servants gather above, called by my awakening. The Barrow-wights and ancient dead are but the least of my forces. Gilrayan's face went white as her far sight showed her visions of the world above. He speaks truth. I see armies of shadow marching from the misty mountain, creatures of darkness that have slept since the elder days. They converge upon the Barrow-downs like moths drawn to flame. Then we must work swiftly, Leaflock rumbled. The trees whisper of a way to strengthen the binding, but it will require a sacrifice that none of us may be willing to make." Caldris turned to the great Ent, his eyes filled with the weight of terrible knowledge. "Speak plainly, old friend. What must be done?" "One must take Gothfang's place in the binding," Leaflock said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Not in body, but in spirit. The web was woven to contain a being of immense power. If that power is removed, another must fill the void, or the binding will collapse entirely." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of the shadow's heartbeat and the whispers of approaching doom. The weight of Leaflock's words settled upon the companions like a shroud. To take Gothfang's place in the binding would mean an eternity of imprisonment, holding back the shadow through will alone while trapped in the depths of the earth. It was a fate that made even death seem merciful by comparison. "There must be another way," Gilraen said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The wise of old were cunning beyond measure. Surely they left some other means to renew the binding." Caldris shook his head slowly. "I have spent years studying the lore of the Elder Days, and this knowledge was hidden for good reason. The binding was meant to last until the end of days, when all things would be remade. But the departure of the Eldar has upset the balance of the world in ways the Valor could not foresee." From the pit below came another sound, not laughter this time, but something far worse. It was the sound of hope itself being devoured, of light being swallowed by an endless hunger. Several more strands of the web parted, and phantom talons began to claw at the remaining bonds. "Choose quickly," the voice of Gothfang echoed from the depths. "Soon the choice will be taken from you, and all Middle-earth shall know the glory of eternal night." Thorek stepped forward, his weathered face set with grim determination. "I'll do it. My folk have always stood against the darkness, and my years grow heavy upon me. Better to end as a guardian than to see all that is good consumed by shadow." "Nay, friend dwarf," Leaflock rumbled. "This burden requires more than courage alone. It needs one whose spirit can encompass the vastness of the binding, whose will can stand against the shadow for ages uncounted. I am old beyond measure, and my roots run deep. Let me take this burden upon myself." But Caldris raised his hand for silence, and in his eyes burned a light that had not been seen since the Elder Days. "You know not what you offer, my friends. This is no mere sacrifice of life. It is the surrender of all hope of rest, of peace, of the reunion with loved ones beyond the circles of the world. But more than that." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of revelation that shook the very foundations of the chamber. "I have not been wholly truthful with you. My true name is not Caldris the Lore-Keeper. I am Olorin, called Gandalf by some, and I have walked in both the Blessed Realm and the mortal lands. I came to Middle-earth long ago, with a mission that is not yet complete." Gilraen gasped, falling to one knee. "Mithrandir, but you sailed west with the Ring-bearers. How do you come to be here?" "I was sent back," Gandalf said simply. "The Valor foresaw this day, though they could not prevent it. My task was to ensure that when the binding failed, someone would be ready to take Gothfang's place. I am here because this was always my destiny." The revelation of Caldris's true nature changed everything and nothing at once. The gray-robed figure who had walked among them was indeed the wizard who had played such a crucial role in the War of the Ring. But he was also something more, a Mire of Manwë, whose true power had been hidden even from his closest friend. "You cannot mean to do this," Thorek protested, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given enough already, served your time in the mortal lands. Surely another can take this burden." Gandalf's eyes were filled with a sadness that seemed to encompass all the sorrows of the world. "My dear friend, I am the only one who can. The binding requires not just power, but understanding of both the light and the shadow. I have walked in the darkness of Moria, stood against the Balrog, felt the corruption of the Ring. I know the nature of the enemy we face." From the pit below, Gothfang's voice rose in mocking laughter. "So the grey fool reveals himself at last. Come then, Olorin, and take my place, but know that your sacrifice will be in vain. The time of the valor passes, and new powers rise in the darkness between the stars. Perhaps, Gandalf replied calmly, but while I have strength, I will stand against you. That is what we do, not because we are certain of victory, but because it is right. He began to remove his grey robes, revealing beneath them garments of white that seemed to glow with their own inner light. As he did so, his true nature became more apparent. The bent shoulders straightened, the weathered face grew noble and fair, and his staff transformed into a blade of pure starlight. "Wait!" Gilraen said suddenly, her far sight showing her something that made her face go pale with hope and fear. "I see riders approaching from the north, rangers of the Dunedain, and with them comes one whose light burns bright as mithril. It is Aragorn himself, King Elessar, drawn by the same signs that brought us here." Leaflock's great head turned toward the distant surface. "Whom?" And from the south I sense the approach of one who walks between the worlds of tree and stone. Radagast the Brown comes at last, though he arrives at the very edge of the hour. Gandalf paused in his preparations, hope flickering in his ancient eyes. If they arrive in time, perhaps there may yet be another way. But we dare not delay. Look how the web weakens. Indeed, the silver strands were failing rapidly now, barely a dozen remaining intact. Through the gaps, shadows writhed like living things, and the temperature in the chamber plummeted as the presence of Gothfang pressed closer to freedom. Above ground, King Elessar rode hard across the Barrow-downs with a company of his finest rangers. The very earth seemed to rebel against their passage, with ancient stones rising from the turf to block their path, and phantom warriors materializing from the morning mist. But Andúril blazed with the light of the westernmost tower, and before its radiance, the servants of the shadow fell back like smoke before the wind. "Make haste!" Aragorn called to his companion. "I can feel the malice growing stronger with each moment. Whatever evil stirs beneath these hills, it nears the hour of its freedom." From the south came Radagast the Brown, no longer the absent-minded wanderer of old, but terrible in his wrath. The beasts of field and forest ran beside him, wolves and bears, eagles and ravens, all united in their determination to prevent the ancient evil from breaking free. The very plants reached out to aid his passage, with roots forming bridges across the streams and branches, clearing paths through the thicket. Meanwhile, in the depths below, the chamber shook with each beat of Gothfang's heart. The remaining strands of Varda's web stretched thin as spiders, and cracks began to appear in the walls themselves. The very foundations of the Barrow-downs groaned under the strain of containing such malevolent force. "He breaks free!" Gilraen cried, her voice filled with despair. "I can see the bonds parting!" But Gandalf stood unmoved, his starlight blade raised high. "Then I go to meet him. Stand back, my friends, and bear witness to the last act of the Guardian of the West." He stepped forward to the edge of the pit, and as he did so, his form began to change. The seeming of an old man fell away like a discarded cloak, revealing the true majesty of one of the Astari. Light poured from him like water from a fountain, pushing back the shadows and strengthening the failing web. "Gothfang!" he called into the depths. "I am Olorin, servant of the secret fire, and wielder of the flame of Anor. By my own will I take your place in the binding. Let darkness be held back for yet another age." The response from the pit was a roar of rage that shook the very bones of the earth. "You think to trap me with such feeble bonds, wizard? I am the Deathless, the shadow before time. Your light will feed my hunger, and your wisdom will serve my will." But as Gandalf prepared to descend into the pit, footsteps echoed from the passages above. Aragorn burst into the chamber, Andúril blazing in his hands, followed closely by Thorin and his rangers. Behind them came Radagast, his eyes blazing with power drawn from every living thing in Middle-earth. "Hold, Gandalf!" Aragorn commanded. "There may yet be another way." Aragorn's arrival brought with it more than just another sword arm, though Andúril's light was welcome in the growing darkness. The king bore with him ancient lore from the hidden archives of Minas Tirith, knowledge that had been sealed away since the founding of Gondor. too dangerous to be widely known, but too important to be lost entirely. "The binding can be renewed," he declared, even as another strand of the web parted with a sound like a breaking harp string. "But it requires the willing sacrifice of one from each of the free people, elf, dwarf, man, and one of the Maiar. Not their lives, but their connection to Middle-earth itself." Radagast nodded gravely. "Aye, I have consulted with the very spirits of the earth. Such a binding would be stronger than the first, for it would be rooted not just in the power of the valor, but in the love that each people bears for this land." "But the cost," Gilraen whispered, her face pale with understanding. "To sever one's connection to Middle-earth is to become as the ringless dead, trapped between worlds, neither alive nor truly departed." From the pit came Gothfang's mocking laughter. "You see? Even now you begin to understand the futility of your resistance. In seeking to bind me, you damn yourselves to the very fate you would impose upon me. Is this not irony beyond measure?" But Thorek stepped forward, his axe glowing with the light of ancient forge fires. "Better to be trapped between worlds than to see all worlds consumed by darkness. I'll take this burden gladly, if it means my people can live free under mountain and hill." "And I," said Gilraen, though her voice trembled with the magnitude of what she offered. "The blood of Numenor flows in my veins, and with it the memory of the undying land. If my sacrifice can preserve what Elendil died to protect, then let it be so." Radagast's eyes gleamed with a light that was older than memory. "I, too, will pay this price. The earth itself calls to me, and I would gladly become one with its eternal vigil, rather than see it corrupted by the shadow." All eyes turned to Gandalf, and the wizard's face was grave with the weight of his decision. "Then let it be done. But know this, once the binding is set, there can be no going back. We will be conscious but powerless, aware but unable to act, until the very end of time itself." "Better that than the alternative," Aragorn said firmly. "But the ritual itself requires more than just our willing sacrifice. It needs an anchor, something to hold the binding to the world of the living." He drew forth from his pack a small silver star, gleaming with its own inner light, the Elisar, gift of Galadriel, touched by the light of the two trees themselves. As he held it aloft, the gem blazed forth with such radiance that even the shadows in the pit recoiled. For a moment, the chamber was filled with the light of Valinor itself, and the whispers of Gothfang fell silent in the face of such purity. The ritual of binding began at the very edge of midnight, when the forces of light and darkness stood in perfect balance. The 4 volunteers arranged themselves around the pit in the cardinal direction, each holding a token of their people's connection to Middle-earth. Thorek bore a fragment of the Arkenstone. Gilraen held a splinter of wood from Numenor's white tree. Radagast carried a staff grown from the heartwood of the old forest, and Gandalf wielded his blade of starlight. But as they began the ancient words of binding, Gothfang made his final desperate gambit. With a sound like reality itself tearing, he shattered the last remaining strands of Varda's web and began to claw his way toward freedom. The chamber filled with such malevolent presence that the very stones began to weep tears of blood. "Too late," the shadow exulted. "I am free. The deathless walks the world again." Indeed, a form began to emerge from the pit, tall as a tower, wreathed in darkness that hurt the eyes to look upon. Where Sauron had been a being of fire and metal, Gothfang was something far worse, a void in the shape of majesty, beautiful and terrible beyond description, that seemed to devour light itself merely by existing. But the ritual continued, for there was no choice now but to complete it, or see all hope die. The 4 volunteers began to glow with inner light as their connections to Middle-earth were slowly severed. Each felt themselves becoming lighter, more ethereal, as the bonds that tied them to the world were carefully unwoven and rewoven into chains that would hold the shadow. "You think to bind me with such feeble threads?" Gothfang roared, his voice like the death of stars. "I will snap them like cobwebs and feast upon your very essence." But Aragorn stepped forward then. the Elessar blazing in his hands like a captured star. By the authority of the line of Isildur, by the strength of the reunited kingdom, I anchor this binding to the world itself. Let the earth and sky bear witness. The gem exploded with light that filled every corner of the chamber, and the ritual reached its crescendo. The four volunteers felt their consciousness expanding, becoming one with the binding itself, their wills joining in an unbreakable chain that wrapped around Gothfang like silver fire. The shadow fought against the growing bonds with all his might, but he was weakened by his long imprisonment and caught off guard by the swiftness of the binding. Slowly, inexorably, he was drawn back toward the pit, his form becoming less solid with each passing moment. "This is not ended," he screamed, as the new chains tightened around him. "I will find a way to break free, and when I do, all who stood against me will know torments beyond imagining." "Perhaps," Gandalf replied, his voice already growing distant as he became one with the binding. "But not today, and perhaps not for 1,000 ages to come." With a final roar of rage and defeat, Gothfang was drawn back into the pit, and the new web of binding settled into place like a silver net woven from starlight itself. In the silence that followed Gothfang's return to his prison, the chamber seemed almost peaceful. The four volunteers stood motionless around the pit, their physical forms still present, but somehow less solid, as if they were becoming part of the chamber itself. Their sacrifice had been accepted, and the binding was complete. Aragorn knelt beside the pit, the Elessar now dim in his hand, its light diminished, but not extinguished. "It is done," he said softly. "The shadow is bound, and Middle-earth is safe." But the victory had come at a terrible cost. The four guardians were trapped now in a state between life and death, conscious but unable to interact with the world around them. They could see and hear, but could not speak or move beyond the confines of their eternal vigil. Yet as Aragorn looked upon their faces, he saw not despair, but peace, for they had chosen this fate willingly, knowing that their sacrifice would preserve all that they held dear. In their eyes burned a light that no shadow could extinguish, the light of hope itself. "We must seal this place," Aragorn said to the rangers who had accompanied him. "Let none know what transpires here, save those wise enough to understand the burden of such knowledge." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Gandalf's voice echoed faintly in their minds, though his lips did not move. "Fear not for us, King Elessar. We go not into darkness, but into a deeper understanding of the light. And should the need ever arise again, we will be ready." Above ground, the first light of dawn was breaking over the Barrow-downs, and for the first time in many days, it was free of shadow. The ancient mounds still stood silent and mysterious, but the malice that had hung over them like a cloud was gone. Birds began to sing again, and the very air seemed cleaner, as if a great poison had been drawn from the earth. In the years that followed, the tale of the binding of Gothfang would be remembered only by a few. Most of Middle-earth would never know how close they had come to a darkness greater than any they had faced before. The Barrow-downs returned to their ancient quiet, and travelers on the East Road would speak only of a strange peace that seemed to linger over the hills. But deep beneath the earth, four guardians kept their eternal watch, their spirits intertwined in an unbreakable web of protection. And in the depths of his prison, Gothfang the Deathless raged against his bond, knowing that his time would come again, but not for ages yet to be counted. The age of heroes was ending, but their greatest deed would endure until the very end of days, when all bindings would be loosed and all debts finally paid. Until then, Middle-earth slept in peace, guarded by those who had given everything to preserve the light. Thus ends the tale of the secrets of the Barrow-downs, where four heroes made the ultimate sacrifice to preserve the world they loved. Their names were written in the book of memory, though their deeds remained hidden from most who walked under the sun. For sometimes, the greatest victories are those that remain unknown, and the truest heroes are those who ask for no reward save the knowledge that they have done what was right. In the deep places of the earth, the watch continues still. Epilogue: The hidden truth. But there is more to this tale. than what the chronicles record. For the greatest plot twist lay not in the binding of Gothfang, but in the true nature of the threat itself. Years later, when Aragorn had grown old and his hair was white as snow, a messenger came to Minas Tirith bearing tidings that would shake the very foundations of what they thought they knew. The messenger was Círdan the shipwright, last of the Eldar to remain in Middle-earth, and his words carried the weight of prophecy. The binding holds, King Elisar, but Radagast the Brown has discovered something in the deep roots of the old forest that changes everything we believe. For Radagast, in his connection to the Eternal Vigil, had perceived what none of the others could see. Gothfang the Deathless was not the ancient evil they had thought him to be. He was a guardian himself, the last warden of an even greater darkness that lay sleeping in the void beyond the world. His apparent malevolence had been born not of evil intent, but of the terrible burden of containing something that made even his power seem small by comparison. The Valar had indeed bound him beneath the earth, but not as punishment for his crimes. They had placed him there as the final seal upon a breach in reality itself, a crack in the music of creation, through which beings of absolute void sought entry into A. His rage and hatred had been the product of countless ages spent holding back the unbeing, the antithesis of existence itself. "Then our binding," Aragorn whispered, understanding dawning in his eyes, "has trapped 4 noble souls in an endless vigil they need not have undertaken." Círdan replied sadly, "Yet it cannot be undone, for the new binding has become part of the world's foundation. They are heroes still, but their sacrifice was born of incomplete knowledge." And so the tale of the Barrow-downs gained a new chapter, one of tragic irony and noble misunderstanding. The 4 guardians continued their watch, now knowing the truth of what they guarded against, but unable to change their fate. Yet they bore no resentment, for in their wisdom they understood that some burdens must be carried regardless of their origin. In the deepest depths, Gothfang too had found a strange peace, no longer alone in his vigil. The binding that held him was gentle compared to the crushing weight of his original burden, and for the first time in ages beyond count, he was able to rest while others shared his watch. The greatest secret of the Barrow-downs thus remained hidden, that sometimes even the darkness can be a guardian of the light, and that the line between hero and villain is often drawn by those who see only part of the greater tale. The watch continues, as it always has, as it always must, until the day when the music is complete and all guardians can lay down their burden at last.